found a blade for my table saw that effectively doubled the power of my saw, cut down the dust generated by 50%, reduced the noise output by 10 decibels, gave me much better cut quality than some of the most expensive saw blades on the market today, and it cost me less than 15 bucks. All right, before I dive in and talk about the new blade that I'm using, let me talk about my previous go-to blades. I had two blades. First, a Woodworker 2 from Forest. That's a $160 blade. I also used the stiffener, and I don't remember how much that cost, but it's a very impressive blade. Never had any problems with it. Had really good cut quality, but I would still find that, for example, when I was making projects like this cutting board with all these thin rips, I would have to visit the jointer after every rip. Now, on a modern saw, if you've got one of the Laguna saws like I tested here recently, or a SawStop, the modern saws are so smooth and vibration free, you might be able to get away with using a Forest Woodworker 2 or comparable blade to get glue joint quality rips. On my older Unisaw, I'd have to make a trip to the jointer after every rip, so I was going back and forth with the jointer a lot on a cutting board like this. Now on this same saw, using my new blade, I don't have to use the jointer for joints like this. I can just make all my rips right here and go straight to the glue up table. So never any problems with the Woodworker 2, but I found a better solution. The other blade that I used for laminates was a Freud industrial laminate blade. Again, great quality, cuts every time. I've used that for a long time, no problems with it whatsoever, but switching back and forth, and that was probably, I don't remember, $60, $70, $80 blade, something like that. So not a cheap blade either. So the new blade that I got, under $15, and I get better cut quality than I do on the Freud, and I would say nearly as good. Not better, but nearly as good as I got on laminates with using the Freud industrial laminate blade. All right, the new blade that I'm using is a Freud 7¼ inch 40-tooth blade. Now, stay with me for a moment. I know you might be saying, well, my saw has a capacity to use a 10-inch blade. God dang it, I'm going to use that 10-inch blade and get the full capacity. If you do a lot of ripping over 1¼ inch or so, if that's your main go-to woodworking cut, then you probably don't want to put a 7¼ inch blade on your saw. Most of my cutting, the vast majority, is under that 1¼ inch range, and so a 7¼ inch blade gives me an 1.5 inch capacity. Subtract a little bit for kerf, and you can rip 1¼ inch with it all day long. I do thicker rips normally on my bandsaw anyway, and I'm not throwing away my bigger blades if I do want to use it on here, if I do want to make thicker cuts on here. Now, the reason that it will double the power of the saw, a couple reasons. One, because it has a smaller diameter, it's going to dramatically increase the torque at the cutting point, and that's just physics. And also by virtue of the fact that it is a 1/16 inch kerf versus a standard full thickness blade for a table saw, which is typically around 1/8 inch, you're reducing the drag on that cut by 50%. So I can feel it even on this big 3-horse cabinet saw, but if you're using an underpowered saw, portable saw or whatever, you'll really feel the dramatic difference in power when you go to the smaller blade. All right, a couple other benefits that are derivatives of the thinner kerf on this blade. One, you're producing half as much sawdust because you've got such a thin kerf. That's a great benefit. Cleaner environment, less waste going out into the garbage. You'll also get much better yield on your wood. Now, you may think that that's a minor thing, and on some projects maybe it is, but if you are doing projects like this, this has about 20 cuts that you have to make one of these, and between the thinner kerf, that gives you about 1¼ inch of additional benefit. And then if I add to it the benefit of not removing additional wood on the jointer, I'm averaging about 2 inches more per yield per cutting board on that. So if I said that differently, for every 6 of these that I build, I get 1 free with the materials that I save. So it's not insignificant, even on smaller projects like this, the additional material yield that you get. Or you may be wondering why I get such better cut quality on this blade versus a $160 Forest Woodworker 2 blade. And really it's a matter of physics. So because the disc size is smaller, there's less opportunity for run out. So if you exaggerated that out and had a huge disc and you were running that, that blade would have all kinds of flutter out at the outer edges of it. It would be very unwieldy. So by reducing the diameter size, you end up with far less run out at the cutting edge than you would on a larger blade. If you think about what blades like Forest do when they add these vibration dampeners or stiffeners, basically what they're doing is giving more control and reducing the run out to the outer edges. With the smaller blade, that's already built in an automatic. You don't have to add a stiffener to that. You get that control, and if you could see that on a microscope, it would be running a lot truer. I can't obviously see it. I don't have a microscope in here or the right instrumentation, but I can tell in the cut quality that you're getting a much better surface. And the difference is very noticeable on hardwoods, softwoods, and in terms of cutting laminate, I get a much better cut on laminate with the 7 1/4 inch blade compared to the larger Woodworker 2. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I don't usually use a Woodworker 2 for laminates. If it's an important cut, I'll put on my laminate blade, and I will get a slightly better cut quality with a little bit less tear out, but the tear out is almost not noticeable on good quality laminates if I'm cutting with this 7 1/4 inch blade. Now, I contend that the smaller blade is safer for two reasons. One is just mathematics. The linear speed at the cutting edge, where the teeth are, on the smaller blade, based on the RPM of my saw, which is 3450, I calculate at 148 miles an hour. On a 10-inch blade, I calculate that at 205 miles per hour. So you're going to have an object, if you get a kickback, you're going to have an object kicking back at you 50 miles an hour faster with the 10-inch blade than you would with the 7 1/4 inch blade. The other reason that I believe it's safe, more safe, is that the smaller kerf on the 7 1/4 inch blade is grabbing a much smaller portion of the wood, so it has less control over it as it's forcing it back at you. I'm not going to try to prove or disprove that. That's a theory, and you can take away what you want from it. Now, you should always use a blade guard, and if you do, you shouldn't have any contact injuries. If you did have a contact injury, I'd rather have one with a 1/16 inch kerf than an 1/8 inch kerf as well. Kind of a gory thought, but is what it is. Another benefit of the smaller blade is that it runs much quieter, and the difference is pretty dramatic. So I measured a difference of 10 decibels when the blades are running idle, not cutting, and about 5 to 6 decibels when they're making a cut. So 5 decibels is a lot. You definitely will notice that in your shop. All right, there are two downsides to using this blade on a table saw. One I already mentioned, which is the fact that you lose about 1.5 inches capacity. So I can cut up to about 1.5 inches with this versus about a little over 3 inches on a 10-inch blade. The other downside is that because it's so thin, your standard riving knife or splitter with your table saw probably isn't going to work. So you're going to have to accommodate that. If you do use a blade guard, which I recommend at least a splitter, you're going to have to get a thinner kerf splitter to accommodate that. A 1/16 inch is pretty thin. I contacted the people at Shark Guard, the makers of the blade guard that I use. And they said, no problem, we can make you a splitter that will work with that blade. And they did. They sent me a splitter that is not only a little bit, just a hair thinner than the blade, which is exactly what you want, and yet it's rigid enough, no problem using the blade guard with that splitter. But the other thing that they did, which I thought was so cool, is they made the splitter a different profile to match the profile of this blade. So the standard splitter would have had a big gap between the blade and the splitter, and they brought it forward quite a bit so that it maintains a nice gap, a nice close proximity between the blade and the riving knife. So kudos to Shark Guard team. They can do this for just about any table saw. So if you have a situation where you need a different splitter on your saw, if you go with a smaller blade like this, give them a call, see if they can make one up for you. All right, that's it. Those are all my key points why I think it's better to use a 7¼ inch blade on your table saw. Let me know what you think. Have you tried this? Has it worked for you? What problems have you run into? And tell me why you think I'm wrong if you think I'm wrong. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll subscribe and come back to the Tool Metrics channel for more woodworking, wood turning, DIY related videos. Thanks again for watching.